Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, U.S. Representative Tammy Duckworth addresses an audience at the City Club of Chicago on her Senate campaign, as well as the issue she's focused on and Republican opponent, incumbent Senator Mark Kirk. Following that, about 40 minutes from now, representatives from the Illinois Civil Justice League and the American Tort Reform Association, among others, expressed their desire to see tort reform as well as greater transparency of political donations from those in the legal field. Then in about 1 hour from now, we sit down with Sean Smoot, the Chief Legal Counsel for the Illinois Police Benevolent and Protective Association, and talk about police community relations, whether the use of police body cameras is a good thing, and what Mr. Smoot says is the severe lack of police officers in Chicago. And finally, in about 1 hour and 40 minutes from now, as we near the 15th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks, we talk to Linda Brookhart, Executive Director of the State University Annuitants Association, as she recalls taking a tour of the White House during the attacks, as well as the mood of Washington, D.C. in the days afterward. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our Advisory Council members.
Hi, I'm Don Schaefer, Executive Vice President of Midwest Truckers Association. We represent over 2,700 member companies in 15 states who operate in Illinois. These men and women are responsible for keeping the food in your store, the fuel at your gas station, and bringing the books to your schools. In fact, look around the house and virtually everything you see will have been moved at one time or another by a truck. That's why our issues are your issues. Whether it's the taxes they pay, the price of fuel, or the regulations truckers must endure, in the end, you, the consumer, pay the price. That's one reason why I'm proud to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. Just as truckers deliver the goods on our nation's highways, the Illinois Channel delivers the information you need on your information highway. The Illinois Channel reaches 1.4 million cable homes across the state, as well as making their programming available as a video stream on their website at illinoischannel.org. Delivering the goods is Midwest Truckers' business. Delivering the information you need to stay connected to the actions of state government, that's the Illinois Channel's business. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next from Chicago, U.S. Representative Tammy Duckworth addresses an audience at the City Club of Chicago on her Senate campaign, as well as the issue she's focused on and Republican opponent, incumbent Senator Mark Kirk. This runs about 40 minutes.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Jay. Thank you. And Paul, Dr. Green, it's always a pleasure. Dr. Green has the, I don't know whether this is good or bad, but he says that the debate he moderated with me in 2012 with Joe Walsh was the only one where he actually required, as the moderator, police protection for his safety. Mainly because the venue where we were holding the debate decided to have a bar and open the bar an hour before the debate began for a debate that involved both Tea Partiers and Teamsters. So, and they served alcohol in bottles, which was very interesting. But it's great to be here. This is the second time I've been to City Club of Chicago while I've been a candidate for the Senate. And that baby girl, Abigail, I told you about the last time I was here when I was just off of maternity leave, is now 21 months old. I know, right? She's running me in circles. I don't know where she gets the energy. I'd like to bottle that and take some of it every morning. But I have a feeling she's going to be keeping it up for years to come. You know, one thing I do love is that she already knows a woman can grow up to fly helicopters in combat. And My husband and I had a contest going on as to what her first word would be, and I said, well, I'm going to make sure it's helicopter, because every time I breastfeed her, I'm just going to say, have some helicopter, honey. Helicopter. Helicopter. She says copter now, so I won that contest. Look, now she'll grow up, I predict, and by the time she's 8 years old, well, she'll be 10 because she's going to be 2 by this November, and the only president she will have ever known will be a woman. That's quite amazing. I'm here to talk to you about my vision for getting Illinois' economy back on track again. I think it's especially important for working families across this great state. Before we begin, though, I do want to address something that's happening in the news recently. This is Chicago. We invented the phrase that politics ain't beanbag. And we used a tough language and tough tactics, but what my opponent said the other day about President Obama, however, that he's acting like the drug dealer in chief, is beyond the pale. Look, you can agree with the president or any president and say so. That's the beauty of this democracy. And I've not been shy, for example, to voice my concern with the way this administration went about arming Syrian rebels, by the shortcomings of the TPP. But you can disagree with the president without resorting to the kind of inflammatory rhetoric, which is not only offensive, it's totally unhelpful to the cause of a more stable and secure world. I can't, for the life of me, understand what Senator Kirk thought he was accomplishing. And if it was just the first time, I would chalk it up to a momentary lapse of judgment. But with him, it's a pattern, both of irresponsible, offensive rhetoric, as well as of personal insults directed at this president. The Sun-Times made note of that very pattern this morning, if you read in the editorial, and I'm going to quote from the Sun-Times. This, unfortunately, is not a new problem for Kirk. He has had a way in recent years of choosing his words strangely. In April of last year, the senator told reporters that he favored support of African-American businesses so that black community is not the one we drive faster through. 1 month later, while discussing an impending pact to limit the development of nuclear weapons by Iran, he said that President Obama just wanted to get nukes to Iran. He soon apologized for that, but then he also called the deal the greatest appeasement since British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain gave Czechoslovakia to Hitler. Look, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and their 2 beautiful girls are a credit to this city and this state. You don't have to agree with everything the administration says or does to be able to admire the man and his family, not to mention the dignity that he has shown in the face of relentless attacks from his political opponents. Senator Kirk has just joined the rogues gallery for the president's fiercest and most unhinged critics. And for that, he should be ashamed. What he said is beneath the dignity of the office he now holds, and Senator Kirk should apologize immediately to the President of the United States as well as to the people of Illinois. We're better than that. We were just chatting at the table about what are the best parts of running for office. And for me, the best part of running for office is actually what I'm going to be doing again tomorrow. I just finished doing it about 48 hours ago. It's getting back on the road. I'm going down to Des Moines. I'm going to work our way all the way down the state. We'll be in through Danville and everything, all the way down to Des Moines for the second state fair. Most people don't know that there are 2 state fairs in Illinois. There's one in Des Moines. So in about 36 hours, I will be eating pork chops on a stick, fried butter. We usually run a contest as to the most disgusting thing you want Tammy Duckworth to eat. And yeah, it's pretty bad. Yeah. But look, I've traveled this whole state over and over, and it's been great. It's been a homecoming because I've served over this state in the National Guard. And I visited Granite City a couple of times in the last 18 months. And, this is a steel town in Metro East. And people don't think of Illinois often as part of the Rust Belt, but we have portions of the state that are. And to say that this town is dependent on the local steel mill doesn't even begin to tell the story. Those mills, of course, are dependent on a steel dust industry that is global in scale. One of the first times that I was in Granite City recently, the plant had announced layoffs the week before Thanksgiving, and 2 days after Christmas, this past Christmas, started laying people off. These men and women have done exactly what you're supposed to do. They worked hard, grueling physical labor, sometimes for decades. They produced quality steel and took pride in it. But here they were, out of a job and uncertain what the future holds because factors outside of their control, specifically policies that allowed inferior products, inferior steel made in places like China and Korea to be dumped on the worldwide market at lower cost than to be sold at a lower cost than it actually the producers in those countries can make it at. Puts our steel manufacturers at a disadvantage. How do you tell someone who went to work every single day, did their job, put in an honest day's work, and asked only for an honest day's pay in return, that that's no longer enough? This election season has brought so much discussion of trade policy. TPA, TPP, even NAFTA seems to be up for reevaluation. And Senator Kirk and I have some fundamental disagreements, and it's a healthy debate to have. But my trip to Granite City and to communities like it that are struggling all across this great state drives home that this isn't an abstraction, this isn't an academic matter, it's people's lives, it is communities' lives. When the steel mill closes because the parent company is getting crushed on the global market, those steel workers still have to pay mortgage, they still have dreams of sending their kids to college, or perhaps they've already taken on 1 or 2 or 3 student loans to keep the one that's already there. They still have a decade or 2 or even 3 of their lives to live and years to go before retirement. We have to do better by them, and we will do better by them. Today, and for the remainder of this campaign, I will be highlighting a series of policy proposals that are designed to help jumpstart Illinois' economy and create jobs by taking advantage of the tremendous resources we have here at our disposal: nature, capital, and human, as well as being smart about making the right kinds of investments in our future and in our people. So let's start with trade. Too often when trade is discussed, it is a reductive confrontation between free trade and protectionism, as though there's no middle ground. I would suggest that there is a fair trade middle ground, and that is what I will be a fierce advocate for in the United States Senate. Make no mistake, our country and our state lose by turning our back on the world. Illinois needs trade to thrive, but when we are debating trade deals, we need to take American manufacturing and American workers into account. Take PP, for example. After a lot of study, reading the entire document, I concluded that I could not support the president's agreement as drafted. In particular, I don't believe the agreement puts in place tough and enforceable rules needed to crack down on countries that manipulate their currencies. And I asked for 4 different personal briefings at the top secret level by members of the trade team as to what that would be. One of the things that is rolling the American steel industry is unfair trade practices. It also failed to include stricter rules of origin so that partners can't cheat by slapping a Made in Vietnam label on products that are largely manufactured in China but then assembled in Vietnam. You know, this defeats the purpose of the labor and environmental standards we negotiated for in these agreements in the first place. Rather than having more stringent rules of origin, unfortunately, the TPP has lower content requirements than NAFTA does for some industries. And I was very clear about wanting to make sure also that the language on currency manipulation should be, you shall not engage in currency manipulation. Instead, it's more advisory, you should not. My congressional district has the highest concentration of tool and die manufacturers in the nation. These firms employ thousands of people, but they're not multinational corporations that can ride out a downturn simply by shifting production overseas or to some other business, and they stand to lose the most from an unfair trade practice. We're not looking out for them and the good they do for Illinois if we don't do our jobs when it comes to trade agreements. Conversely, I strongly support the administration's efforts to open trade with Cuba. I support the bipartisan Cuba Agriculture Export Act. I think it will actually remove restrictions on export financing and marketing for American agriculture products. This will allow farmers to compete on a level playing field and gain access to a market that is valued right now at over $1 billion per year. Illinois agriculture benefits when new markets open up, especially largely untapped ones that is so close to our own shores. I was also and continue to be a strong supporter of the Export-Import Bank reauthorization. I prioritize being a facilitator for the small and medium-sized businesses in my district to learn about federal resources and held many workshops in my district, teaching them how to apply for export-import bank loans and assistance guarantees. I intend to do so all across this great state as senator. I want to see a manufacturing renaissance here in Illinois, and that starts with investing in our workforce and in our manufacturing businesses. When I talk to manufacturers in my district, and now all across the state, the most common refrain that I hear is about the lack of qualified workers to fill jobs for which they're hiring and for the high average age of workers that are already in these businesses. In fact, a 2015 survey by Deloitte and the Manufacturing Institute found that 82% of manufacturing executives say that workforce shortages have a significant impact on their ability to meet customer demand, and that 6 of every 10 production openings they have are unfilled due to a shortage of skilled workers. These are well-paying jobs in modern manufacturing facilities that are fueling our economy. So to address this issue, I introduced the Career and Technical Education Opportunity Act, which is a bipartisan proposal that would allow students to enroll in career technical programs to use their federal student aid towards earning industry-recognized credentials, as well as the Community College to Career Fund Act, which is modeled after the Harper Community College-owned Advanced Manufacturing Program. In 2014, Harper teamed up with Northrop Grumman in my congressional district to train workers for openings in their high-tech manufacturing facility in Rolling Meadows. Northrop officials were involved in developing coursework specific to their needs. Part of the program included paid internships so that the students could get out of the classroom and develop practical real-world skills. Northrop got to see the students as their interns, to see their actual work production, and they ended up hiring 4 students for full-time positions and requested another 7 students for the following academic year. So far, the Harper College program has enrolled over 2,100 students to date for many different manufacturers, and I've introduced a bill to expand this type of program nationwide. It's also a recognition that not everyone can or wants to go to a 4-year institution. And that 4-year degree should not be the only path to middle-class income and stability. Likewise, I also introduced, as one of my first pieces of legislation in Congress, the Troop Talent Act, which makes it easier for our military men and women to transfer the skills they learned in the armed forces into civilian life and receive the proper licensing and credentialing before they leave the military so they can step right into a similar job following their service. There is no uniformity across the branches on this. And I'm co-sponsoring the Manufacturing Reinvestment Accounts Act, which acts like IRAs for your retirement, but for manufacturers, but not for their retirements. These accounts would enable small and medium manufacturers to make annual pre-tax contributions for up to $500,000 into an MRA for a period of 7 years. Funds withdrawn from the account could be invested in machinery, facilities, and job training, thus lowering their tax liability and encouraging them to invest in their workers and in their factories. Helping individuals to reach their potential to create the best workforce in America is a smart investment. So it's ensuring that small and medium-sized businesses, which form the backbone of our economy, have the same advantages as multinationals. To that end, I support reforming and simplifying the tax code to make it more fair and less complicated. I also want to make sure that research and development tax credits for small businesses are protected. Last year, I worked successfully across party lines to insert 4 amendments into the National Defense Authorization Act that will help make it easier for small businesses to compete for government contracts. These proposals will, 1, provide greater accountability for senior agency executives who are responsible for overseeing small business subcontracting. 2, remove barriers to capital for small businesses. 3, improve training for small businesses advocates. And 4, allow more small businesses to compete for federal construction contracts. Rebuilding Illinois' manufacturing muscle requires continuing to invest in areas where we already have an advantage, as well as tapping into some new ones. In the 19th and 20th centuries, we built the great machines that farmed the land all across this great nation. We manufacture the equipment that work the construction sites and the steel that is the spine of our buildings and our roads and bridges. For the 21st century, Illinois should be a leader in the renewable energy revolution at each step of the process. We're already a leader in installed wind capacity, although there's room for expansion. As it stands right now, only 5% of Illinois' energy needs are coming from wind. Compare that to Iowa, that gets 30% of its energy needs from wind. You know, we should also tap into our advanced manufacturing capacity as well as our central location to build the wind turbines and the components right here in Illinois. In 2011, when I first ran for Congress, I got to tour and visit Blythe Industries, which is a small manufacturing facility that used to make components for helicopter parts. They switched to windmill parts, and now they have more orders than they can possibly meet and fulfill for windmill parts with the workforce that they currently have. That's the kind of growth I want to see right here in Illinois. The Chicago area is home to headquarters or regional offices for 14 wind energy companies. After the production tax credit had expired, I organized a letter to former Speaker Boehner from the Illinois delegation, bipartisan letter, encouraging the PTC to be extended as soon as possible. And I was proud that that extension was included in the 2015 Omnibus Spending Bill and signed into law. Here in the Prairie State, we've grown the hogs and farmed the corn and soybeans that fed a nation and the world. In this new era, let's once again put our rich and fertile farmland to use developing the biofuels that will help end our reliance on foreign sources of oil. So I support the renewable fuel standard, which is driving job creation and innovation right here at home and supports more than 852,000 green, well-paying jobs nationwide. These are jobs that can't be shipped overseas. And as you might imagine, this is an issue that's deeply personal to me. It starts with the fact that the first job I ever had in Illinois was working on a project for the American Farmland Trust out in DeKalb, helping farmers convert to no-till farming practices. But it also is based on the fact that if ending our reliance on foreign oil means one less Middle East war, then that is a worthy investment. There is so much promise in renewables, and we have everything in Illinois to be a global leader. Much like Granite City, however, there are places throughout this state that are reliant on a single industry. Only this industry is coal. Let's be clear-eyed about this. The reality of our global energy supply is that coal will remain a major source of energy for much of the world, especially the developing world, for decades to come. If we're serious about addressing climate change, investing in carbon mitigation technologies is smart policy. It will also provide new opportunities for coal workers in Illinois, those who have worked hard and are terrified of an uncertain future. That's why I'm a proponent of investing in carbon capture technology to help bridge old and new energy industries. And I am co-sponsoring a bill to expand tax credits for carbon capture and storage. We can help this generation of coal miners finish their careers with dignity, while also working to make sure their children and grandchildren's futures are in renewables. There are other sectors in Illinois that has great untapped potential, and I plan to bring my experience and expertise on military procurement to bear. Alongside Senator Durbin, who is the ranking member of the Senate Defense Appropriations Committee, I think two strong and effective and committed senators can help leverage Illinois' resources so that as the military continues to modernize and new projects come online, we are in the mix. This also is personal to me. Our troops should be getting the best equipment, period. And if that equipment is made in America, all the better. And if it's made in Illinois, that would be the best. In fact, I have worked hard with a manufacturer called Oshkosh that is out of Wisconsin, and I had talked with them about the fact that when I was running for Congress in my congressional district, I said, I think I have 8 sub and subcontractors for you in my district that produce parts for your vehicles. And the CEO said, no, I don't think so, but I'll check. That sounds optimistic. He came back to me 2 weeks later and said, actually, it's 22. So while we may not have a major defense manufacturer, all stand alone in Illinois. We have many who are involved in defense manufacturing. Northrop Grumman just got a major contract. Oshkosh Trucks just got a major contract. There's no reason why we should not be manufacturing so many of the parts that allow our men and women in uniform to be effective and keep them safe right here in our state. In fact, I've been working for the past year with Rep. Cherry Bustos to increase production at the Rock Island Arsenal, which employs 6,000 people in Quad Cities. There are critical defense items being manufactured overseas, which not only might deprive Americans of jobs, but also opens up a number of national security concerns. If it's practical to make those defense items in America at places like Rock Island, we should do that. And as the only Illinois representative on the Armed Services Committee, Demo Republican, I was able to shepherd an amendment requiring just that through the NDAA. Finally, I believe it's time to make a serious investment in our infrastructure. For one thing, we need it. I'm not sure if I'm the only one who got here today on a road or over a bridge or could stand to be in better shape. Don't tell me your stories. I know you've gone over them. In fact, there are over, I think the statistic that I heard a couple years ago was that there are over 200 bridges alone in the Chicagoland area that are deemed to be substandard but safe for travel. I'm not sure how it can be substandard and safe for travel, but we need to repair those. Interest rates continue to be at a near all-time low, and the economy, while improving, is not growing as fast as we would like it to. The threat of what former Treasury Secretary and economist Lawrence Summers calls secular stagnation is a real one. Making major nationwide investments in our infrastructure makes sense now. I've seen how effective this can be in my own district. I helped secure $300 million in federal funding to begin construction of the long-delayed Elgin O'Hare Expressway extension, which supports 64,000 jobs. That roadway has always been the bane of those of us who live out in the far western suburbs because it neither begins in Elgin nor does it end in O'Hare, but we call it the Elgin O'Hare Expressway. We're fixing that. But it's brought in 64,000 jobs. My office also helped secure a Tiger grant to rebuild a 134-year bridge over the Fox River that had not had a significant upgrade in over 80 years. It will mitigate metro delays for the 50-plus commuter trains that use it every single day. There's a need for projects like this all over Illinois, and they create good jobs. That's why I support the creation of a national infrastructure bank, and I support a $478 billion long-term transportation bill that would create 2 million jobs, paid for in part by restricting corporate tax inversions, that is, multinational corporations avoiding U.S. taxes by setting up their headquarters in a P.O. box in a foreign country. On that note, one of the major infrastructure projects we should commit to right now is a nationwide effort to replace lead pipes that carry our drinking water and harm our kids. Whether it's Flint or dozens of public schools here in Chicago, we have a moral obligation to make sure our children's drinking water is clean and safe. Illinois has so much potential. We are blessed to live here. That doesn't mean that there aren't very real challenges or that we're doing as well as we can be doing. We need real leadership to help catalyze our tremendous resources into results that improve the lives and well-being of all our people. So that's what's on my mind when I met with those workers in Granite City, and it's the same thing when I'm in Danville or Rockford or the south side of Chicago. I'm hearing from people who feel like they're working as hard as they can, but they're falling behind. They're worried about sending their kids to college or having a secure and dignified retirement. They've heard that there's an economic recovery, but they're not feeling it. They're looking for solutions. That's the challenge and the directive I take from them. I respect their struggle, and I want to honor it by helping Illinois reclaim its rightful place as one of the country's economic and innovative leaders. What, on the other hand, is the incumbent Mark Kirk offering after 16 years in office? Well, you've already seen it in your mailboxes. His pitch to voters is that he's a social moderate, a fiscal conservative, and a national security hawk. So let's unpack that one at a time, shall we? It's true that he has long cultivated a reputation as a social moderate, and he certainly say not from Ted Cruz's wing of the Republican Party, but it's hard to square his self-identification with the action he just took last month when he was tasked with writing the conference report in Congress on the Zika funding bill, and he instead approved the insertion of a poison pill provision that blocked Planned Parenthood from receiving funds for vital public health efforts, such as providing family planning services to help prevent the spread of this sexually transmitted virus. Puerto Rico is already in full crisis over Zika, and there are news stories every day about Zika reaching deeper into the mainland United States. Kirk's Republican Senate colleagues rallied behind the partisan conference report that he co-authored and signed final approval on. We still don't have adequate funding to fight Zika, and more Americans are at risk. Now, we can't even square his statements that the Paycheck Fairness Act is, in his own words, and I quote, the most sexist piece of legislation you can have. You know, I can't think of another way to get Illinois' economy growing. Well, one way that we can get Illinois' economy growing is to actually make sure that women are being paid equal to men, and that women are not making $12,000 less than men on average. That's $12,000 less than their families have to spend on the local economy. I happen to think that equal pay is not a sexist thing. When it comes to social moderation, it seems like Mark Kirk is only there when you don't really need him, especially in an election year. But when you do need him, he's either a no-show or he's ineffective. How does he stack up as a fiscal and conservative? Well, it depends on who's in office. When he was sworn in along with George Bush in 2001, the country was actually running surpluses and the national debt was being paid down. This was undone quickly by the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy, by the Medicare prescription drug benefit, and by 2 wars put on the credit card. Kirk was there every step of the way and voted for it all. He even was a co-author of the Iraq invasion resolution. People forget that. But the Bush administration tapped Mark Kirk, the self-described defense expert, to co-write the Iraq invasion resolution. Dick Cheney summed that era up best. Deficits don't matter. They only mattered to Kirk when Democrat Barack Obama took office and the big spender became an austere deficit hawk. He's not a fiscal conservative. He's a fiscal phony. He is, however, guilty as charged when it comes to being a national security hawk. And my only question here is why he thinks that's something to be proud of. Throughout his career, he's been quick to sound the drums of war. Throughout his career, Kirk has been tragically wrong. I've been to war, and I like to think that I'm pretty tough. I also have a master's degree in international relations, and I'm pretty clear-eyed about the world we live in. I've never felt compelled to call for the military option before exhausting diplomatic ones. And I am genuinely troubled by someone like Mark Kirk, who is so quick to do so and who takes pride in being called a hawk. Let me be clear. My family has defended this great nation for 240 years, going back to the Revolution. My family are among those that bleed first when we go to war. If you need us to go to war, we will be there. My dad served, my husband served, my brother served, I served. And someday, if I do things right and don't piss her off, Abigail will serve. Families like mine bleed first. War should not be the first option. We should lead with our economic might. We should engage with the world. We should lead with diplomacy. War should be the last option. And I plan on being there in the Senate to make it clear. In the weeks ahead, I'm going to continue to make my case to the people of Illinois, and Senator Kirk will make his. We clearly have different visions on what this state can be and how best to get there. Ultimately, through my own experiences, as well as talking to people all across this great state who want nothing more than to feel that economic opportunity is within reach, I believe that America is at its best when we're investing in our people. I embrace the notion that lifting one another up doesn't cost nearly as much as leaving other Americans behind. And that's why I'm running for the United States Senate. I want to thank you and your time for your time and company today. It's always an honor to address the City Club of Chicago. May God bless you. May God bless our troops who are in harm's way right now. We just lost another brave American in Afghanistan. I just read in the paper this morning. May God bless all of our veterans in military hospitals and VA hospitals all across this great nation. And as always, God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Okay. We have a question that's not signed and not on the official form. So, right, Jackie, we have to stick to the rules. But if we don't have any more questions, I'll have to ask it. Here we go. Patrick Hughes, please tell us, Patrick, right over there. Please tell us about the camouflage bill you introduced. Fascinating story of millions of dollars saved.
Yeah.
That's called a softball.
That is a softball. So I have, people are going to ask, how do you pay for these things, the policies that I've talked about? And I detailed some of the ways to pay for them, but I've made federal procurement reform one of the hallmarks of the work that I do in Congress. And the camouflage bill is a great example of combining my desire to save money, also my stature as a military veteran. I don't think a lot of other folks could have pushed this bill through. It's a long story. They tell you never tell a story that lasts more than 90 seconds, but bear with me, the payoff is worth it. Up until 2003, the United States military purchased one pattern of camouflage fabric for each environment it operates in. Desert, the Arctic, woodlands camo. They use the same fabric, but they cut it into different shapes. And the Marines had pockets that were a little canted. If you remember in Vietnam, it was the green. We called it the pickle suit. In Desert Storm, it was a chocolate chip pattern. We called that the Storm, and Norman Schwarzkopf wore it. But it was the same fabric, and it just said U.S. Army, U.S. Marine, U.S. Air Force on your chest. In 2003, however, the United States Marine, and my daddy was a Marine, God bless Marines, did something that was very typical of the Marines. They invented the first digitally created, computer-generated camouflage pattern. And they embedded into it, teeny tiny, like every 7th pixel or something, the letters USMC, the United States Marine Corps, and the symbol of the Marines, the anchor, globe, and eagle, and they copyrighted it. This led to an immediate arms race between the branches of service to each develop their own camouflage pattern, so went from 2003 to when I was sworn into office in 2013, we went from one camouflage pattern in each environment to 14, including one that the Navy had that was shades of blue. What does blue camouflage you with? It does camouflage you with a ship, and it's not like we're going to have an aircraft carrier float by in the Persian Gulf and have Al-Qaeda say, oh, there's nobody on that one. We can't see anyone. Let that ship go. The problem, so that the Navy was spending double and triple the budget of other branches on, in comparison on uniforms, because when they were in Afghanistan, they had to buy a whole nother set of camouflage fabric for uniforms for the desert or for the Afghanistan environment. And they couldn't even use the uniform on a ship because when their sailors fell overboard, now they're camouflage. They can't find them in a man overboard situation. It's actually a safety issue. So I introduced a piece of legislation that passed late in the night. It was very controversial because the Marines, there were members of Congress who were Marines who said, you're going to hurt Marine Corps pride. And I had to say, well, I've never met a Marine who was not so proud of his Marines that he would be affected by the fabric that he was wearing. And we passed it, I think, with like 2 or 3 votes. We flipped 5 Republicans, I think. The Government Accounting Office said in the estimates of my proposed bill that it would save $89 million in the first year that if it passed and went into effect. They came back 18 months later and they said it had already saved taxpayers $4.3 billion in a report. There's money that is wasted in government and we can recover it. Medicare knowingly wastes up to $60 billion a year in wasteful and fraudulent claim. It's why I'm partnering with Peter Roskam, a man who beat me in 2006, why I'm co-sponsoring his legislation to go after waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare. Because I want to imagine what we could do in Illinois if we had 1/50th of $60 billion annually. Federal procurement reform. Thanks for the softball.
Congresswoman, can we keep the answers a tad shorter?
Okay. I warned you.
Just a tad.
Okay.
There's the man who asked the question, sure. Okay, real quick, and we have Mark Weimiller, who, of course, is one of our leading radical liberals. Those of you know Mark. I'll answer this question for you, Congresswoman. I attended the great Walsh-Duckworth debate of 2012. Mm-hmm. 12. 12. Hey, we work alone here. will Paul Green moderate the 2016 Kirk Duckworth debate, and how many Senate debates? Well, no, I will not moderate. I will not be asked. How many debates are you going to do?
I don't know how many Mark Kirk has agreed to, but I've accepted 5 joint appearances. The Tribune, the Sun-Times, and 3 debates that are televised. I would love it if you would moderate.
Oh, sure. If I mark Warmwell right in front of me. Okay, here we go. Charlie Gardner. Oh, I'm asking a Charlie Gardner question. He happens to be a Roosevelt University trustee. Pure coincidence. Good question, a quick answer, Tammy. Are you disappointed with Gabby Giffords' endorsement of your opponent?
I think that is a political decision on their part. I think that I stand on if you look at my record on gun violence, it's very clear. I was at the sit-in. I'm co-sponsoring legislation that closed loopholes. Many of organizations have an incumbency endorsement. If they, it's like HRC, right? Mark Kirk had a 30+% voting record for HRC. In the year he's up for re-election, he gets a 76% voting record, and they endorse him, while I have had a perfect record every year that I've been in Congress. So, this is a political thing, and this is the way it is. Like we say here in Chicago, politics ain't beanbags, folks.
Okay. Edbert Hoffman, member of the City Club, Castlewood Homes. What do you see as the deficiencies in the current version of the TPP, and how would you change them? Short answer.
Yeah. Well, no, I think I touched on it. So the TPP, 2 main things: country of origin labeling. Actually allows in some categories for products to be made, components in a product to be made in a non-TPP agreement country, shipped, say China, shipped to Vietnam, and actually just basically assembled in Vietnam, and it could actually come into the U.S. as a made in Vietnam product, but actually over 50% of the components were made in China, and that I think is unfair. Also, the currency manipulation language, I have problems with. It should not be advisory. It should be regulatory. It should be enforceable. So it shouldn't be, you should not engage in currency manipulation. My understanding from some of the tool and die folks that I've talked to, the last time we had significant currency manipulation was Japan, and we lost 25% of the U.S. tool and die manufacturing industry. It should be, you shall not you should not engage in currency manipulation. So there's 2 examples right there.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.
Next from Chicago, representatives from the Illinois Civil Justice League and the American Tort Reform Association, among others, expressed their desire to see tort reform as well as greater transparency of political donations from those in the legal field. This runs about 25 minutes.
Good morning. I'm John Pastuvic, President of the Illinois Civil Justice League. Up with me here today in order of appearance are L. Adamite, Executive Vice President of the Illinois Civil Justice League, Tiger Joyce, President of the American Tort Reform Association, and Travis Aiken, Executive Director of Illinois Lawsuit Abuse Watch. Today, we are going to reveal the findings of a new study titled Justice for Sale 3, completed by the Illinois Civil Justice League and released in conjunction with Illinois Lawsuit Abuse Watch and the American Tort Reform Association. The study reveals the campaign contributions by trial attorneys to Illinois politicians and judges has topped $35 million over the last 15 years. In addition to the $6 million contributed through the Illinois Trial Lawyers Association Legislative Political Action Committee, the top 25 plaintiff firms and their lawyers and family members collectively invested $29 million in the campaign of Illinois office seekers from January 2001 through March 2016. These campaign contributions have gone to legislators, constitutional officers, judges, state's attorneys, county board chairmen, circuit clerks, county party chairmen, mayors, union leaders, and politically allied special interests. Our studies document a truly staggering flow of plaintiffs' bar cash. The more than $35 million in contribution equates to roughly $264 a day, every day of every week for the past 15 years. The study also shows that 98% of these trial lawyer donations were directed to the most powerful incumbent politicians in Springfield and other Democrats. While ITLA's PAC and plaintiff firms donated millions, policymakers they supported made Illinois tort laws even more to the trial attorney's liking. During the study period, Madison County set an infamous national record for the most new class action filings in a year, and a statewide medical liability crisis threatened critical care for Illinois patients. Meanwhile, lawyers and judges in Madison County built the nation's largest and most notorious asbestos docket, attracting more than 13,000 individual asbestos cases in 15 years. In fact, sources now estimate that 1/4 of all asbestos cases filed nationwide are now filed in Madison County. With an estimated outcome of $2 million per case, the Madison County asbestos rocket docket could be worth more than $1.74 billion, that's with a B, annually, and could produce nearly $600 million annually in contingency fees for plaintiff attorneys. Additionally, just last month, a couple of weeks ago, the Illinois Supreme Court, in a 4-3 party line decision led by Justice Thomas Kilbride, derailed a bipartisan movement comprised of more than 500,000 Illinoisans and various good government groups who wanted to give voters a chance in November to decide whether an independent committee should draw nonpartisan maps for legislative and judicial districts instead of maintaining the one-party gerrymandering status quo. It's no coincidence that the trial lawyer-funded Democrat Party donated $1.5 million to Kilbride's 2010 retention campaign. Interesting, if not surprising, is the fact that the biggest trial lawyer donations supported campaigns in Cook, Madison, and St. Clair counties, each widely known as once and future judicial hellholes. And you'll hear a little bit more about the judicial hellholes in a moment. And when one considers that these counties also host the state's highest concentration of lawsuits, it's fair to ask, is justice for sale in Illinois? Now to discuss some of the details in this study, I'd like to introduce Al Adamite, Executive Vice President of the Illinois Civil Justice League. Al.
Good morning, and thank you, John. A large majority of the donations given to legislative leaders, individual senators, and representatives were given through the ITLA Legislative PAC. The PAC then distributed 2,624 individual donations to the campaigns of 320 different legislative and statewide constitutional office candidates. As displayed here in the graphic to my left, 98.6% of these donations went to Democratic candidates. Some comparisons, 51.5% of the PAC contributions went to House leaders and candidates, 32.7% went to Senate leaders and candidates, leaving the balance of 15.8% to candidates for statewide executive offices. The largest benefactors were the Senate Democrat leaders, Emil Jones and John Cullerton, who collected $713,600 in PAC donations in their 4 leadership funds. House Speaker Mike Madigan was the second largest benefactor, collecting $658,500 in PAC donations in his 3 leadership funds. Additionally, former Illinois Governors Rod Blagojevich and Pat Quinn, current Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan, and former Illinois Comptroller Dan Hines are all favorites of ITLA's PAC, receiving $237,000, $156,000, $105,000, and $63,000 respectively. The coverage of legislative giving is astounding. Under the previous legislative map for the years 2001 through 2010, PAC contributions were given to candidates in 56 of 59 Senate districts and 103 of 118 House districts. In the 3 cycles under our current legislative map, PAC contributions were given to candidates in 43 of 59 Senate districts and 85 of 118 House districts. Of course, the districts under the new legislative map, as has been recently reported, are much less competitive as they've been much more narrowly drawn, and there doesn't seem to be any hope for remedy of that after the Supreme Court's decision last month. I want to quickly expound on the study's composition and methodology, including the research that went into documenting the $29 million in donations given outside of ITLS PAC. So again, the study concentrates on the $6 million within the PAC and the $29 million outside of the PAC, and that's what gets us our $264 every hour for the past 15 years. Based upon the level of law firm and attorney giving to the PAC, we were able to total the contributions given by each firm and its attorneys over the past 15 years. Not coincidentally, two law firms tied for the most given to the PAC, each at $265,600. So we don't know exactly how their PAC giving works, but it does seem to be regimented in a way that is set and structured, and it's apparent that certain firms are encouraged to give a set amount. Over the study time period, we looked at the top 25 firms that had given to the PAC, and 8 of those 25 firms had given over $200,000 and another 7 over $100,000. However, the non-PAC giving was substantial by the total of these 25 firms. Of the 25, the largest amount given was by the Madison County-based asbestos firm led by John Simmons. It's originally the Simmons firm, then the Simmons Cooper firm, now Hanley, Conroy, and Simmons. Their leaders have given almost just under $5 million to Illinois politicians over the study period. The Chicago-based Clifford Law Firm gave more than $4.6 million, and 7 firms in total topped $1 million, and 15 of the 25 the firms topped at least $500,000. We should remind our readers that we only researched the top 25 firms for the non-PAC donations, which again totaled more than $29 million. It's possible that with an unlimited amount of time and effort, this number would grow larger if we surveyed the State Board of Elections site for all the other 300 plus additional donors to ITLS PAC, donors that gave somewhere between $100 and $70,000, but unfortunately did not rank in the top 25. The non-PAC donations to the legislative leaders and reps and senators are exponentially greater than the PAC donations. For example, while Speaker Madigan, as I mentioned, received about $650,000 in PAC donations, his 3 leadership, the speaker-controlled campaign funds, received $6.8 million in non-PAC funds, or non-PAC giving that was outside of ITLS legislative PAC. While PAC donations to the funds controlled by Senate Presidents John Cullerton and Emil Jones topped $713,000 from ITLS PAC, the non-PAC donations to the same funds were nearly $1.9 million. Many of the largest individual legislator benefactors of the trial lawyer donations are districts that are centered around, and you guess it, Cook, Madison, and St. Clair counties. I strongly encourage you to take a look at the maps on pages 12 and 13 in our report that visually depicts the House and Senate districts that have the largest geographic concentration of campaign donations. It visually depicts the concentrations around Cook, Madison, and St. Clair counties. Now, a quick note about contributions from trial lawyers to judges, especially the donations that came outside of their legislative PAC. There were $3,171,923 given directly to Supreme Court contests, and 95.6% of those donations were invested in the 5th or 1st judicial districts, the districts that include Cook, Madison, and St. Clair counties, which are often cited as judicial hellhole counties by our partners at the American Tort Reform Association. 99.9999% went to Democratic Supreme Court contests or to oppose Republican Supreme Court candidates. That's right, so 0.0001% were given to Republican candidates. I can sum that up. That was a $500 contribution given by the Clifford Law Offices to Citizens for Rita Garman on December 3rd, 2001. So it's very distinct that most of the judicial contributions are going to Democratic candidates. Millions of dollars of trial lawyer donations have also been flowing to local Democrat Party committees, municipal races, and countywide contests. Trial lawyer donations totaling $1.4 million were given to local party committees in 17 of Illinois' 102 counties. 99.5% of those donations went to Democratic Party committees. Contributions to countywide contests totaled $1.8 million, and those with donations to Democratic candidates accounting for 97% of the donations. Donations to county officials and candidates in Cook, Madison, and St. Clair counties accounted for 95% of all donations. So the concentrations on these three counties, as well as a couple other counties in the Southern Illinois-based 5th Judicial District, are of no surprise in our research. As John mentioned, the latest report on county-by-county per capita lawsuit filing data that was released last year by the Illinois Civil Justice League in our litigation imbalance series showed that the average number of civil lawsuits per 1,000 residents for the 99 counties that aren't judicial hellholes in Illinois averaged about 1.25 lawsuits per 1,000 people. That average is double that in St. Clair, it's triple that in Cook, and it's 6.5 times that in Madison County. So again, considering the dramatic disparity in lawsuit filings for those counties, it's unsurprising that trial lawyers would flood campaign donations to just those three counties. It's my pleasure to introduce Tiger Joyce from the American Tort Reform Association. Thank you for being here this morning. Tiger.
Thank you very much, Al, and to John Pastuvic and to the Illinois Civil Justice League for allowing me to join you today. Particularly want to commend the ICJL for this outstanding report, which I think is important to look at and consider, and with regard to the point that I really wish to make, which is the failure of the leadership, the political leadership in Illinois, to enact meaningful legal reform, to undertake reasonable steps to fix clear abuses in the system. So let me highlight that a little bit. You've heard a little bit of discussion of ATRA's Judicial Hellholes Report. Our report is a document and report generated each year towards the end of the year by our affiliated foundation. And regrettably, as I've come to the state a few times in the last year or two, highlighted the fact that unlike some places where meaningful reforms have helped to move jurisdictions off of our report, Illinois has proved to be continually and persistently reluctant or outright refused to take reasonable steps to achieve reform. I do want to say that civil justice reform is an important component of addressing what are widely regarded as historic problems in your state with the budget and the overall economy of your state. You don't have to believe me. All you need to do is look around others in the region. When you look to Wisconsin, Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, even a little further into West Virginia and Pennsylvania, which are launching efforts, and West Virginia successfully got itself off of the judicial hellholes report by enacting meaningful reform in the last couple of years. And even we're optimistic about your neighbors in Missouri, where we're hopeful that 2017 will be a terrific year. But I really want to use the abuses and the problems that are really the most significant perennial problem of Madison County, and in particular the asbestos litigation, as an example of why addressing these reforms and dealing with these issues is so particularly important. In a somewhat disparaging way, we simply say Madison County has allowed itself to become a dumping ground for asbestos cases. I think that most people would like to think of their community in a little more elevated terms than simply being a place where everybody goes to file lawsuits, particularly asbestos cases. And this has been well documented, as I said, in our judicial hellhole report. John mentioned estimates of a quarter, even as much potentially as of a third of all the litigation in the United States involving asbestos claims. This is important litigation, but is being brought in Madison County. What really illustrates the abuse, though, is that over 90% of the plaintiffs in these cases have one thing in common, and that is they have nothing in common with Madison County. Courts and the judicial system are really intended to be set up for the people in those communities, not for people outside. And that, in and of itself, is a fundamental problem. And I think as the Illinois Civil Justice League documented last year, on a per capita basis, compared to Cook County, where we are obviously right now, asbestos case filings are 168 times higher than they are here in Cook County. Madison County filings are 168 times higher than they are in Cook County. Now, if you're a defendant in one of these cases, oftentimes you hear something called a rocket docket. I'm a lawyer, and you like to think things move along quickly, but if you're one of the lawyers who finds that there are potentially 209 cases that are going to start trial in a given week, you're going to look at that situation and say, this is hopeless. We have no opportunity. Fundamental fairness and due process are really out the door. That rocket docket is abusive. It should be fixed. And also, in keeping, just to illustrate, of those 209 cases, only 19 were from Illinois. And in a later week, there were 316 cases were planned, only 7 were actually from Madison County. So it is clear that it has become a dumping ground. This is a situation where judges are not doing their jobs. They're not doing their jobs by ferreting out the cases that don't belong there, addressing that issue. They have a lot of discretion. It should be addressed. Your governor has called for fixing this problem through the legislature. Unfortunately and regrettably, that has not happened as well. We think that the ICJL report sheds important light on why this is not happening, and sets, and I think for elected officials, for those who care about public policy, and in particular the legal system, there should be a lot of questions asked of those public officials. Why aren't we fixing, why isn't the state fixing its venue rules? The governor has called for addressing joint and several liability, a very reasonable reform that has been enacted in virtually every other jurisdiction in this country. The failure to address that, I think, speaks volumes. It puts you at a competitive disadvantage, and I think ultimately is an indicator that the problems more broadly in the state are going to continue unless and until they're addressed. I would finally just conclude that the answer to this issue is to challenge those accepting these campaign contributions, to do what's best for the state, to recognize that reform is in the public interest, and in particular the reasonable and modest proposals that have been sought, and then to address key issues that John mentioned, like medical liability and others that had been addressed previously and need to be reinstated and reformed. So we look forward to highlighting those successes. We hope that that this outstanding report of the Civil Justice League will be a catalyst towards those reforms, and look forward to commending Illinois for that important success. And again, our congratulations to the ICJL. I'm now pleased to turn the podium over to Travis Aiken of Illinois Lawsuit Abuse Watch.
Thank you, Tiger. It's always good to see you here in Illinois. As Tiger well knows, Illinois is indeed one of the worst states in the country for legal fairness. Madison County continues to rank as one of the worst judicial hellholes, and neighboring St. Clair County, along with Cook County, where we are today. Also make frequent appearances on the Judicial Hellholes Report from the American Tort Reform Foundation. Illinois is also ranked the 3rd worst state in the nation for legal fairness, according to a report from Harris Poll. The culture of lawsuit abuse in Illinois is driving jobs and opportunities to other states. We just recently saw in the news some information about how Illinois has lost 354,000 adult residents from 2005 to 2015. These are workers. These are people who are in the workforce, and we've lost a lot of them in the last 10 or 15 years. We're also losing workers at an alarming rate because there are no jobs. The reality is that creating new and meaningful jobs in Illinois is the solution for every major issue facing the state today. And the best way to start to turn around Illinois is for voters to elect legislators who will embrace the Governor Rauner's proposed lawsuit reforms, such as venue reform, to stop personal injury lawyers from venue shopping to favorable Illinois court jurisdictions. We've heard a lot about those jurisdictions today: Madison, Cook County, and St. Clair counties. What Illinois needs is jobs, not more lawsuits. And today we learned we now have 35 million reasons why Illinois counties continue to attract lawsuits and personal injury lawyers from all over the country, and why we are shedding jobs to neighboring states. This study proves that personal injury lawyers are gaming the system to their advantage by fueling millions of dollars in campaign contributions to Illinois judges, who continue to allow these junk lawsuits that have nothing to do with Illinois to move forward here, prompting the very real question, is justice for sale in Illinois? Personal injury lawyers fuel the campaigns of judges, who then make favorable rulings for their campaign donors, which generates even more money for these personal injury lawyers to invest in even more judicial campaigns. It's a vicious cycle that has to be broken. We need to stop the cycle at its source by ensuring that Illinois is no longer a favorable destination for lawsuit tourists. When personal injury lawyers continue to game the system to their advantage, it is no wonder our state has become a favorite destination for personal injury lawyers looking to hit the lawsuit lottery. And when one avenue of lawsuits dry up, these personal injury lawyers go out and find new ways to sue. We even looking to other states to find these new lawsuit opportunities. For instance, here in Cook County, the wave of ADA lawsuits has plagued the state of California, is now plaguing the state of Illinois. And we're seeing more and more ADA lawsuits, Americans with Disability Act lawsuits, filed right here in Cook County. And then, of course, we have the notorious judicial hellholes, Madison and St. Clair counties. The problems in Madison County are well known, are all across the nation. Madison and St. Clair counties continue to be ranked as perennial judicial hellholes, due in large part to the close connections between the judges in those two counties and the personal injury lawyers who fund their campaigns. One of the most basic ways to stop lawsuit abuse in Illinois is to elect judges who will stand up to the personal injury lawyers and say no to frivolous lawsuits. With their tremendous power over what takes place in their courtrooms, judges can help Illinois shed its reputation as a plaintiff's paradise. Who is serving on the bench matters. Electing good judges who apply doctrines of common sense, fairness, will help stop lawsuit abuse in Illinois and help our state attract employers who currently don't want to risk moving to a state where they'll immediately have a lawsuit target on their backs. Voters will have a chance to deliver their verdict on judges who take the majority of their campaign funding from the personal injury lawyers who've turned the land of Lincoln into a job-killing land of lawsuits. Illinois judges who will stand up to the personal injury lawyers and return common sense and fairness to our courts. We need those kinds of judges serving on the bench today. This report highlights the cozy relationship between judges and personal injury lawyers who fuel their campaigns. Law firms have every right to be a part of the political process, but the public needs to know what they are doing and who is benefiting from their campaign contributions. There's an old expression in journalism, follow the money. When it comes to judicial elections, voters need to follow the money. It will turn and then make an informed decision when the appropriate time. So with that, I will turn it over to John. Thank you.
Thanks, Travis. Are there any questions? If not, I'll give you a chance to get your cutaway shot. All right.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.
Thank everybody for coming. Thank you.
Next, from Springfield, we sit down with Sean Smoot, the Chief Legal Counsel for the Illinois Police Benevolent and Protective Association, and talk about police community relations, whether the use of police body cameras is a good thing, and what Mr. Smoot says is the severe lack of police officers in Chicago. This runs about 40 minutes.
Sean Smoot, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
Pleasure to be here, Terry. Thanks for having me.
As we sit here, there's been so much of late in the national news, most of it bad news, about the different shootings going on both in New Orleans and in Dallas. We hear any number of things going on a periodic basis in Chicago relative to police action or misaction, the Black Lives Matter movement. So we wanted to talk to you and kind of put some of this in perspective and get your insights as the head of the Police Benevolent Protective Association. As you look at these issues, what's your reaction? What would you want people to consider as they hear this information come out?
Well, I think, you know, perspective is important. And one of the things that we lose sight of is, yes, we are experiencing in some places, particularly in Chicago is a good example, significant increases in shootings and homicides. But, you know, taken in a historical perspective, short-term history, the numbers are very high. But we're not setting records. So that means that numbers have been higher in the past. And
when you say the numbers are high, what numbers do you mean?
Particularly violent crime shooting numbers, which seem to be the ones that the media focuses on the most.
And you're talking about relative to police shootings?
Relative to officer-involved shootings and just relative to the real high numbers are actually shootings that occur where in a lot of cases, gang members are shooting at each other, and unfortunately, the number's fairly high as well, of just innocent bystanders that get in the middle of those shootings as well. In terms of officer-involved shootings, in other words, when I say that, I'm talking about an incident where a police officer shoots somebody. Those numbers are actually down significantly nationally. Over the last year, in particular the first several months of this year, they're way down. Now, a lot of people have different opinions as to why those numbers are down as well. But the fact of the matter is, you have a city like Chicago where violent crime is up very high, shootings are up extremely high numbers compared to the last 10 years. If we go back 20 years, you know, you would see numbers from the 1990s that were very similar to the shooting numbers that we're having today in Chicago. I think the big issue really is when we compare what's happening in Chicago in terms of overall crime numbers and what's happening in other major cities, some of which are significantly larger than Chicago, like New York and Los Angeles. Their crime numbers are far, far lower. In fact, there's been more shootings in the city of Chicago this year than there have been in New York and Los Angeles combined. And I think if you combine those two cities, you really have almost 8 or 9 times the population of Chicago.
The Laquan McDonald shooting was one of the more famous incidences of recent times and continues to percolate and have ramifications. Unfortunately, it kind of made people think how shootings like this can be swept under the rug. The prosecuting, Anita Alvarez, prosecuting attorney for Cook County, didn't release the video for a year afterwards. But let's talk about, on the other hand, there's now a movement to have cameras on police officers throughout the land. Is that something that is welcomed by the police departments? Is that a good thing, a bad thing? What's your take on it?
I think it's a double-edged sword. So in one respect, I think it's very welcomed by members of the community because they believe that, you know, the presence of the camera will provide evidence of how the police conduct themselves when they're interacting with the public. I can say along the same line, they're welcomed by the police for the same reason, because they can show how the police interact with citizens and how citizens interact with the police. And so, you know, I think from both standpoints, there may be a bit of apprehension, just in terms of people thinking that officers feeling like, you know, Big Brother's watching them. At the same time, you have citizens with the same types of fears that, you know, because police are wearing cameras, that their privacy rights will be in some way reduced. And
well, and on that, let's say if somebody gets a DUI, they're going to be recorded.
Yes.
It might be the only time in their life they have a DUI. Has anyone discussed these issues about who has control of that video? Does that video just sit out there in the public domain indefinitely? Because that obviously could damage someone's career.
I think that's a great example, and actually that's one, you know, we actually passed a law here in Illinois 1 year ago, August 1st, so it's been a year and a month. It went into effect January 1st of this year regarding body-worn cameras. Now, so let's take your example. Somebody, you know, the one time in their life when they make a mistake, they get a DUI, there's some embarrassing video out there. If it's body-worn camera video, if the person, if the video doesn't get flagged for some other reason, for instance, complaints made against the officer that they mistreated the individual, or it gets flagged because it's going to be used as evidence in a criminal case, then under our law, under the current law, 90 days after that recording was made, it'll be destroyed. And so that was actually one of the concerns that the ACLU and some other groups involved in drafting the bill voiced very loudly, was that, you know, that we would be creating this type of video that you're talking about that will be around forever. Some states, like the state of Washington, have extremely liberal public information disclosure laws. And so you have police departments like the city of Seattle, which has virtually posted every body-worn camera video that the department has on a YouTube channel. Now, what they did, and which is permissible under their laws, they posted the video, but they've blurred everyone's face. So it's there for anyone in the public to see, but you can't really see who they are.
I know there's these scam businesses down in Florida that will take people's mug shots and put them up on a website, and you know, especially going back to the DUI example,
right?
You know, people have to pay $300 to get these people to take it down. It's really blackmail,
right?
I mean, they operate technically legally, but it's a concern, and so the public ought to be aware that when we're talking about this, I think they think, well, that's not going to involve me. That's like they envision the South Side of Chicago, some police officer with some gangbanger.
Right.
It may very well affect you or your children.
Absolutely.
Or something else.
Absolutely. I mean, and so, you know, the goal of the law and the goal of having these cameras is not to create, you know, gotchas for people, members of the public, or for police officers either. You know, and in you know, over 90% of the cases where external complaints are made and a department has put a body-worn camera program in place, the camera footage actually exonerates the officer.
You know, it's interesting. I just heard this morning a bit of an interview that somebody did. They were talking about this new book, Chicago is Not Broke. And the point of the book, as I understand it, is that there's all kinds of money the city is spending that it needn't spend. And one of those is they were saying over the last 10 years or so, the city has spent, I don't want to get it too high, but like $50 million settling police cases.
Yes. A year.
A year.
Yeah. That's true.
So, which is an enormous sum. On one hand, having some of these cameras would probably pay for themselves if somebody's making an accusation.
Yes.
That is not going to be borne out, but to show that the police officer was professional. On the other hand, we have, in most cases, I guess, unionized police forces, and certainly in the larger cities. Would this help to get rid of some of those officers who are acting in a way that is not professional?
Well, I think, you know, look, first of all, we have to start from a premise here, and that premise is there are people in every profession that shouldn't be there. I don't care if it's doctors, lawyers, bankers, even politicians now and then wind up in places they shouldn't be, or journalists. And so, you know, certainly, you know, the cameras are going to capture events that occur. And if somebody makes a mistake, that's going to be captured. If somebody has a habitual use of force abuse problem, that's going to be captured, certainly. But I think if you ask police officers, by and large, the answer that you're going to get in terms of, you know, do we really want to protect any of these people? The answer is always no. You know, a good police officer's worst enemy is a bad police officer. Because, you know, and I think we see this virtually every day, and I'm fortunate because I get exposed to the really good things that police do. And, you know, and the problem is, for every 10,000 great things that police officers do every day, it only takes one bad thing for one police officer to do, and that'll be what leads to headlines for the next 2 months.
Well, and to that end, we've also seen video recently, not to spend the whole time here on video, but we've also seen video where officers are pulling people out of car wrecks that might be on fire and being heroic.
Absolutely.
So.
And you know, comforting babies. There was just an amazing phenomenon on Facebook where a female officer, I think from North Carolina, responded to a scene where two parents had overdosed, and one of them died as a result of the overdose. The other parent was I think is in the hospital and recovering. There were 3 children there, and there's someone took a picture of this woman officer comforting this baby, and the baby asleep on her shoulder, and that within 2 hours on Facebook, you know, that had, I don't know how many thousand hits. I mean, it's still circulating around. I think we've got it on our Facebook page. It's so you know, but that's and the line, you know, the interview of the officer was, you know, basically she said, hey, we do this every day.
I was going to say that the new reality, and I sometimes think that all of us are still not yet intellectually embracing this, is that increasingly we're going to be on a televised world, and with platforms such as Facebook, we're all going to have a little more exposure, and so we all have to kind of adjust to that new reality. We almost, when there's something happening these days and no one has video of it, it's almost shocking that there wasn't some camera somewhere to capture some of it.
And I think that's an important point too, and that's one of the things, you know, we never kind of made the full circle on the issue of, do police departments are they welcoming the body camera technology? You know, one of the concerns that I've heard is regarding this stuff is, you know, there was a certain, and if you talk to prosecutors, you'll hear them talk about the CIS phenomenon. And what that refers to is there's a myriad of shows, NCIS and NCIS Miami and I don't know, there were 3 or 4 others, where the television program really kind of focused on the forensic abilities of these crack law enforcement agencies, so that, you know, they maybe the opening scene would be a murder, and then, you know, within 30 minutes they'd have DNA, and they'd have all these, you know, all this physical evidence collected of you know, leading to who committed the crime. Really entertaining shows, but really entertainment, because bears absolutely no reflection of the reality that law enforcement finds itself in today in terms of forensic evidence collection and processing. I don't know how many DNA kits we still have at the Illinois State Crime Lab awaiting processing. I mean, going back years and years. So this idea that, you know, you can get these results, you know, at the snap of a finger, really put into people's mind. And what happened, so when prosecutors talk about the CIS phenomenon, what they're talking about is it's very difficult to get juries to convict in many cases, because they're expecting there to be evidence there that they've seen produced on these television shows, which isn't there. Similarly now, I think, and more, this is going to your point, it's going to get more and more prevalent. If there's not officer provided video, either from a body-worn source or from a dashboard source, there really will be a presumption in people's minds that there's a reason it wasn't there.
Well, we had a case of that recently where all of a sudden there was like 3 or 4 officers there and no one's camera was working, and so the presumption was that you guys turned it off to engage in malfeasance. You know.
Right. And so, you know, I think I know the case that you're talking about, and so I suspect that the facts will bear out that that it wasn't the case. But the interesting thing about the technology is that when people expect it to be there and it's not there, you know, that they form an opinion in their mind that, you know, maybe the person's credibility, in this case the law enforcement officer's credibility, is suspect.
Let me ask, again, because I don't want to spend the whole time talking about video, but that's one of the, tell us just for a moment, I probably should have started here, about your organization. Who do you represent and where are your members?
We represent police officers all over the state, from as far south as I would venture Maryville, Glen Carbon, the Metro East area, Alton, several places down there, up to Chicago and Waukegan, and over to Joe Davies County.
Now, is there a difference between police officers and like sheriff, or are you covering anyone in law enforcement?
Law enforcement officers, so peace officers, which would include sheriff's deputies. We represent probably 10,000 active and retired officers all over the state of Illinois. Our smallest department, you know, maybe a Metro East area department that has, you know, 15 or 20 officers. Our largest group is the Chicago Sergeants Association, which has 1,250.
And so you would represent them. Well, you do a variety of things, which, I mean, on one hand, as you alluded to, you're going to help get a bill passed. You might help you do some lobbying, let's say. So you're going to either try to get a bill stopped that you think is a bad bill, or get a bill passed that you think is going to be an improvement. But by the same token, you also served on President Obama's Council of 21st Century Policing, yes, where there's a collection of people looking down the road of what do we need to change, what's working, what's not working. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that came from that effort that you think is going to improve policing nationwide over the next decade or so?
I think it really provides a roadmap for, and what you're referring to is the President's Task Force report, Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And I think it really provides a roadmap for police departments to kind of come into the 21st century. If you go through the report itself, you know, you'll see identification of virtually every serious issue that's facing law enforcement today, and then a set of recommendations and action items to implement those recommendations.
Can you tell us first what are some of them?
Sure. So, you know, I think probably one of the most important pillars in the report is the first one, which is trust and legitimacy, and how important it is to build trustful relationships between law enforcement officers and the communities that they serve. And you know, we tend to over-focus on statistics a lot in policing, and what I mean by that is there was a system for police management called CompStat that was developed in New York City probably 15 to 20 years ago. And the idea behind CompStat was to hold police supervisors for certain geographic areas or defined geographic areas responsible for upticks in crime within their geographic area of supervision. And what that really resulted in was a lot of data compilation for the New York City Police Department. They were very successful in reducing crime and in recognizing patterns of increases in certain crimes and then deploying resources to solve those problems. I think the big challenge that was created as a result of CompStat, though, was there became almost an overemphasis on, for patrol officers, the line officers, to really focus on the number of stops that they made, the number of frisks that they made,
so it became a paperwork nightmare for the patrol officer?
Well, not only that, Terry, but it wasn't just a paperwork issue. It was an issue about, you know, here's the thing, no matter if it's police or other employees, when you're counting things, you know, the interpretation that your employees get is what you count is what's important. And so rather than emphasizing the relationship between officers and citizens, a lot of departments got into a modality where they became very focused on certain crime stats: homicide, burglaries, violent crimes, and the thought was the more aggressive officers were on smaller crimes, and the more aggressive officers were in interacting with people, doing stop and frisk, trying to find firearms on people, drugs, and so forth, that would reduce those numbers, the serious crime numbers. Didn't really bear out that way, and really built a chasm between the communities that need police the most and the officers that police in those communities. And so, you know, during the task force hearings, we heard hundreds of witnesses, and I should say probably 100, maybe 120 to 150 live witnesses, and then we took tens of thousands of pages of written testimony that was submitted. And so, you know, when you have a young African...
Can I interject for a moment?
Yeah.
This sounds a little bit like Rudy Giuliani when he became mayor, that they started this program of tackling the minor crimes like graffiti and things like that, which cleaned up an area, and it kind of destroyed the environment in which crime thrived, if I understand what their point would be. But they also had the stop and frisk, which now I think has been discontinued. But what I hear them talking about is that then crime has come back up because you're not doing the stop and frisk. Is there any solid consensus of whether that was a good thing as far as a law enforcement tool or not?
So it probably depends on what your philosophy of policing is. In many respects, they got more guns off the street. You know, was crime reduced? Certainly the stats were reduced, and we can get into that. You know, I think you and I have both been around long enough to know that statistics are easily manipulated, depending on what you want them to show. Unfortunately, what we saw as a result of CompStat was a significant amount of pressure put on police supervisors that was then pushed down to frontline supervisors, who then pushed it down to the line officers to do things like reclassify crimes so that they would be classified as less serious than maybe what they really were. So instead of an attempted rape, you might have an attempted burglary or an attempted break-in reported. And there was a pretty significant scandal involving this, somebody actually recording briefings that took place in the New York City Police Department. These were reported
where they were being instructed to diminish the reporting.
They were basically being told, hey, the watch commander doesn't want to get chewed out at the CompStat meeting next week. You know, if you have any breaking and enterings, report them as, whatever the next lower crime you can report them as, so that they, essentially the message that went out, which I think, Chicago Magazine did a three-part story about 2 years ago. It was a very similar situation occurred in Chicago, where detectives were told to report things that were obviously homicides as, mysterious deaths or attempted suicides, to make the numbers look better. At least that was the implication in the article. And so, it has a terrible effect within, especially a police organization, for officers to be given the message that, it's okay to be dishonest about something if it makes you look good. And I think that really has a,
kind of is a cancer within the department.
It just wears at that trust foundation that they should have. So
we don't have time to go through all of these. These are all interesting. I wish.
I'll come back.
It'd be good, yeah, to follow up. It would be good, And let's take relationships. I've wondered, and I've never lived in Chicago, but when we know the preponderance of crime is going to be in certain areas, Do you find when you look at the distribution of police officers, are they being assigned where they should be assigned? In other words, can we go, or do we need more police officers assigned to these heavy crime areas? Is that an issue when you talk with other departments? I mean, just how strategically crime is being handled?
Well, I think Chicago's, first of all, obviously it's the biggest city in our state, so, and it's the biggest city in the Midwest.
So it certainly represents a special
right
challenge, you might say, compared to
yeah, exactly.
smaller towns.
And that's exactly my point. Now, I will say this. I spend a lot of time in Chicago. Some of my biggest units of folks, police officers that I represent, work in and around Chicago. Chicago is grossly understaffed.
In terms of police officers?
In terms of police officers everywhere, in every neighborhood.
Why is that? Because the city is having such financial difficulties?
I think the city has made, a judgment a few years ago that it would be more cost effective for them to allow the ranks to kind of dwindle, to push officers off of desk assignments and put them out on the streets as folks retired, but not actually replace street officers. And I think we're seeing the consequences of that.
Do you know what the numbers are like today compared to, are they down like 5,000 officers, or what's the number?
No, I mean 5,000 would be a huge amount. But I do think they're down, I think they're down about 1,500 from where they should be. And I suspect, they're under a Department of Justice investigation. I suspect the DOJ will find that there's not enough officers and not enough supervisors as part of their investigation. That's strictly my opinion, but I'll be very surprised if that isn't noted, at least noted in their investigation report. And so, there's a shortage of officers in most departments, but in Chicago, it's
more pronounced.
It's very, very pronounced.
When we talk about going into Chicago, and we might say, okay, we're not going to stop and frisk. We're not going to go out of our way. I guess the argument would be to cause confrontational relationships. But what can be done when we have an area like the South Side or West Side of Chicago with heavy crime areas, and there's an environment there that's just going to be different in, let's say, more law-abiding areas? Are we asking too much to say police officers can address this through community relations, or is, that would seem to me to be asking the impossible of the officers? They might try to work and not be seen as the bad guy on the street, but to be more the police officer is your friend, which is how, when I was growing up, I viewed police officers.
Right.
But they're still going to be working in these areas where there's an environment of people engaging in criminal activity that is more considered a norm than it would be in law-abiding areas.
Well, I think that's, I don't want to necessarily categorize anyone as, that their situation is, or that the norms of that community are that criminal activity is okay. I will say this. I think everybody recognizes, at least anybody who really thinks about these issues recognizes that we can't expect the police to solve all the problems in these communities. If you look at an area like Englewood, where there's a tremendous amount of violence virtually every day, and if you look at what else is in that community, you're going to see an island there. There is very little access to health care, very little access to or no access to jobs in the community, no access to good groceries for that matter, and challenged schools. So you have all of these other pressures on that community. Now, we could put a police officer on every corner. That's not going to solve all these other underlying issues, and the fact that there's no economic development in that neighborhood. And so I do think that that's an unrealistic expectation. However, I also think it's important that we look at what success has been achieved in other places like Los Angeles, where because of a significant investment by the city of Los Angeles, they have turned around the relationship between police and the community in places like Watts, where has been a historically.
65 was a horrible riot.
And again in the early 90s. And so if you look at the work that they've done there, and it's not easy, and it takes
when you
resources.
say they made an investment, in terms of what? Did they do something for economic redevelopment in the area? Did they add more police officers to the area?
Well, they added a number of things. First of all, they made a real investment in terms of policing. And when I say policing, I'm not necessarily emphasizing the enforcement in law enforcement. They, in the city of Los Angeles, they created a unit that was dedicated. It's a 3-year commitment, minimum 3-year commitment for officers who get assigned to this unit, and their job is to essentially work in the community to help identify problems in the communities and help develop solutions, and act as ambassadors for the city, ambassadors for the police department. I think there's, in Watts now, I think there's about 45 to 50 of these officers. And they're involved in, not just patrolling, but, having community meetings. They know everyone in the neighborhood. They made a commitment to being involved in things like after-school programs for the youth. They have football leagues for the youth, baseball leagues, and police officers who act as coaches and mentors in various activities in these communities. And the turnabout has been very profound. You have people who would have told their children never to talk to the police, don't ever trust the police, who are now entrusting the police with their kids for prolonged periods of time. And that doesn't mean it's perfect, because it's not. Nothing's perfect. They still have shootings in Watts. They still have crime in Watts, although nothing close to what it used to be. And they have a relationship with the police so that they can help resolve issues instead of creating bigger and worse issues between officers and citizens. But it took the city of Los Angeles, remember, was under consent decree for about 15
would almost
years.
make it...
They've had to make a serious financial commitment to put officers in this situation and get the officers to make a serious commitment to spend a significant portion of time in the specialty unit in Watts. And that's just one example. There are others all around the country.
I was going to say, I'd almost make an analogy. Sometimes when people are living under stress, and we see this with family disturbances, and they act in a way that they otherwise would not act. Mm-hmm. And you can see that at any number of social, it's across the spectrum of socioeconomic activity, right? I mean, family. By the same token, we might have, as in Watts, it seems to me like when you go in there and do the things that those officers are doing, you can perhaps reduce the stress level on the people living within that community so that they too then act in a more civilized way to each other, just because everyone's kind of chilling out and relaxing a little bit more and understanding that they're going to be protected and get through. It's an interesting point as far as the policing techniques do not just involve putting someone up against a wall and frisking them.
Right, and that's exactly my point. The other thing is if you look at the success stories, and there are many out there, where police departments have really made the investment, great things can happen in those communities. And if you look at neighborhoods in the city of New York, for instance, and look at what Harlem was not that long ago, maybe right. 15, 17 years ago.
Harlem for years was considered just a high crime area, a bad area. Right. No one wanted to go there, and now it's been totally...
You can't touch it. You can't touch
real estate prices are shot up.
Less
the
than
crime
$1 million.
has dropped. Yeah.
That's right. and it's a
It's
very
been a real
place to
success
be.
story of the last 10 years or 12 years or so.
Yeah. And so I think that's, that's another example of where, all the pieces kind of work together. And the neighborhood, in Harlem in particular, is a great example of the importance of integrating and gentrifying neighborhoods, because that's what happened there. And I don't see a lot of that in Englewood. And that's, unfortunate, because I think in that neighborhood in particular, in that community, it's almost like people have given up or written off that community. And that's not what policing's about.
Okay, Sean Smoot, maybe that's it. There's so much more we could talk about, but we appreciate the time. We'll let you get back to work.
My pleasure.
And thank you for visiting.
You bet.
Hi, I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. For over 80 years, we've represented the interests of those who work in the Illinois trucking industry. We work with members of the legislature to pass laws to help make the roads safer, to help keep Illinois trucking competitive, and to help provide ongoing educational opportunities for those in our industry. The technology of trucking is forever changing. So too are the laws regulating the trucking industry. That's why the Illinois Trucking Association is proud to support the work of the Illinois Channel, which keeps citizens around Illinois connected to what's happening in state government and what changes are being discussed that will impact their families, their communities, their future. And the Illinois Channel gives those of us in industry an opportunity to share our thoughts on public policy with our fellow citizens across Illinois. I'm Matt Hart, Executive Director of the Illinois Trucking Association. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council on Transportation. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, as we near the 15th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks, we talked to Linda Brookhart, Executive Director of the State University Annuitants Association, as she recalls taking a tour of the White House during the attacks, as well as the mood of Washington, D.C. in the days afterward. This runs about 10 minutes.
Linda Brookhart, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. And we'll start off by saying to those who don't know, you're a board member, but the reason, I should say a board member of the Illinois Channel, the reason we're talking to you today is hard to believe. This September 11, 2016, marks the 15th anniversary of the attack of 9/11 in New York and Washington. Most Americans saw it happening on TV, but you were actually in Washington that day and visiting the White House. What were your experiences on 2011-2001? Or 9/11, I'm sorry, 2001?
Surreal, for one thing. I was out there with a group called the National Taxpayers Conference, and we had just done a tour of the White House. We were to have a little bit of time in between before we went to the old executive office building for a briefing. And I was standing outside taking pictures of everyone going in, and being the last one in, of course, somebody was holding the door yelling, "Come on, Linda, get in here." And as soon as I stepped in, security was rushing everybody back out again. I ended up in the middle of the street and just happened to look up. I was talking to a security guard and some other people from the conference, and when I looked up, I saw the plane, and the woman standing next to me said, "Linda, you have the camera, take the picture," which I did, and that was right before the Pentagon was hit. So that started a scramble, and why I bring this up is because this started a scramble in the street, but people weren't trying to run over each other.
Well, let me before. So you were outside. You saw this plane go over. You happened to take a picture of it. There was subsequently a book written called "The 9/11 Mystery Plane," which that was referencing the plane you took a picture of.
Right.
And you say that was not the same plane that hit the Pentagon some short time later.
Right.
But why did this plane draw your attention at all? We've all seen planes flying over. Why did you bother to take a picture?
Because it was in restricted space and airspace.
Meaning that in Washington, D.C., they don't allow jets to fly directly over the White House, directly over the Capitol.
Or any of the statues or anything like that. So we knew that that was unusual. And then right after that, like I said, the Pentagon was hit. People started moving. To a certain extent was a scramble because there had been like 4 or 5 buildings right around there emptied out. And so you can imagine how many of us were in the street. It was getting very crowded.
Well, and I should back up to say the Pentagon was hit after the World Trade Towers were hit. Yes. When you were at the White House, did you know at that point of the attack in New York?
No. What we knew was that when we walked out of the White House, we saw the side lawn there. There's a patio or something where newscasters come to interview the president, and that was being set up. And so as we're walking by, it's like, so, wow, what's going on? Well, we soon discovered that our cell phones, anybody that was east of the Mississippi, we found out later, their cell phones were immediately cut off. And then later, anybody west of the Mississippi River, their cell phones were cut off. So the group that I was with, some of us were able to make calls to try to figure out what was going on, but up until then, business was going on as usual. So it wasn't until the sighting of the airplane and the hitting of we started talking about, oh my gosh, the towers have been hit, but like I said, we're still going on into our meetings and things just like we would have normally done. And then everything changed after we were evacuated.
So when you were first at the White House for your meeting, did you know at that point that it was a terrorist attack in here?
No. In fact, when we were at the White House, that was early in the morning, and it was just a tour. And so that was this was with a group. We came out, and as we were walking by, like I said, we noticed they were setting up on this grassy patio-like area and just kind of talking amongst us what was going on. Some of us realized that we had no cell phone, like I said, but we figured out later that it was all of us on the east side of the Mississippi. And so those on the west side, who still had, of the Mississippi, who still had phone service, found out that the towers had been hit. And so they were telling us.
Did you think when you were, since the fact that you were at the White House, first of all, the distance between the White House and the Pentagon is a number of miles. It might be 8 miles. Did you hear the plane strike the Pentagon? When you were that far away, did you physically hear it? Or?
No. What we saw was the smoke. And so, we didn't see the smoke immediately because so many of us were focused on the plane in the air. And I honestly made the comment, is it better to be under the rubble or on top of the rubble? Because at that time, you're just like out here in the open. And then the Pentagon was hit. We turned around when people started scattering. We saw the smoke, and some of the guys actually ran towards the Pentagon. You can't get to the Pentagon because there's a major highway there. But all the businesses shut down. Everybody was moving out. You couldn't find you could still use landlines. And I had a luncheon set up with Senator Durbin's office that day for our group, and they called me to leave a message that there would not be a luncheon that day, which I thought was very considerate at them, but at the same time kind of comical that, you know, I wouldn't have figured that out. We did.
Did you, when you were at the White House, did anyone start to go, well, we might be standing right here next to a target?
No, because this was way before, not way before, but it was definitely moments, couple hours, maybe an hour before, because we were there like at 8 o'clock in the morning. We were one of the first tours in. So, like I said, we came out and then.
And where were you? Were you able to get back to where you were staying, or were the streets just packed with people on foot then because everyone was letting go, the employees, and closing down?
You have to understand that if anybody knows me, I would not ever take a direct route back. But the woman who I was with, we had to go find her brother, who was also in Washington, D.C., and we reached him first, and then we headed back to the hotel where we were staying. And Washington, D.C. was basically shut down, and everybody was talking. We watched on TV a lot of what was going on. We were all using landlines to call home and let our families know that we were okay.
Now, the other thing is, as you said, they shut down then all the air flights in the entire nation. I presume you flew to Washington. How long before you could get back to Springfield, and how did you manage to get back?
Rented a car from a friend of mine who lived in the area. He managed to get us to an airport that had a car rental that we could bring back to Illinois, but that wasn't until, like, I think Friday night, and we drove straight back. But during that time, we were in the hotel, and they all said, well, you can go outside if you want. You don't have to stay in here. But if you walked outside, it was very, very dark because the lights were all off. And
is that right? They turned the street lights off?
Yes. And you could not walk 2 steps without finding that you had someone from the armed forces right there with machine guns and everything else. And you get out and you take a few steps more and you realize this is not, I think I'll go back to the hotel and be cooped up. So in the days that followed, there was one day that I stayed and walked around with another couple that was at the conference, and like I said, the whole experience was very surreal. Picking up newspapers with the headlines, of course, but nobody's walking the streets. It was just like something that a force had come through and nobody was there. We were the people left, if that is a good description. And then I ended up, a friend of mine whose brother worked for the Department of the Aging, he came and got me and took me to his place to stay until Friday evening when we were able to get a car to come back.
What do you think now, 15 years later, when you think back to those days? Do they seem surreal? Does it seem like it was not 15 years ago, or what are your reflections?
I still think of what could have happened that didn't happen, how lucky all of us were that something that, you know, that it was, I mean, I think it's horrendous that it hit the Pentagon, but still I'm thinking how much worse it could have been. I just think of all the many people that were in the streets. Had they chosen the street rather than the Pentagon, even, like I said, I just think that we were all very, very lucky that day.
All right. Thanks for joining us.